Hello, and welcome to today's version of Philosophy 100. Today we'll be discussing Karl Popper's article Science as Falsification. But before jumping into Popper, I'm going to say a few things about science, as you can see from the title slide here. So where we've been, we've spent a little bit of time talking about direct observation and how that doesn't really get us knowledge, and then talking about repeated experience, which doesn't appear to get us knowledge. And so if we can't look at the world and gain knowledge from it, if we can't sort of do tests and rely on repeatability and things like that, it seems like, we don't have any knowledge at all. And of course, the elephant in the room the whole time is, well, what about science? Okay, well, what about science? And here we are. So our ideas about science, that science is this thing that gets us some form of absolute certainty, and that we can sort of confidently say all kinds of things because science, right? This is the ideas we get that way are often from sources other than science. So a lot of the ideas that people have about what science is are not, in fact, from science, they're from other sources. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of those things before getting into Popper's article here. All right, so first off, it looks like what happens is that we have this sort of appearance, right, about what science is like. And we get this appearance from, of course, you'll notice this is a nice sampling of scientists and sciencey people from television and film. And in all cases, right, there's just this one person, right, who does all of the brilliant science, right? Of course, you'll notice there's Dr. Bunsen Honeydew from the Muppet Show in there, and he's without his faithful sidekick Beaker. But Beaker doesn't really do any of the science. Beaker has science done onto him. But in any case, if you look at the rest of these people, they're all people who work alone. If you look at, Spock, for example, he's the science officer on the ship. Like, he just does all the science, right? Which is weird. I guess it makes sense for television purposes and for film purposes, but it doesn't really match a very important reality. The important reality is something more like this, okay? And so I will say this. I've put a lot of excerpts from actual scientific research here on this slideshow, and I really found all this stuff basically yesterday in about 13 minutes by going to pretty much 2 websites, okay? So this is not something I've not cherry-picked these examples. This is pretty much very run-of-the-mill. And I didn't have to look very hard to confirm these things that people who really read a lot of science know that it's like. So, for example, just take a look at these 2 articles, or like just little citation clippings from them. You see their titles. You see some citations there, published very, very recently. Both of these, one from PLOS, the Public Library of Science, and another from the journal Nature, one of the better sort of interdisciplinary science journals there are. And of course, the first one has 17 authors in it. So many authors that you actually had to put a button in there. You have to click on it to view them all. 11 authors in the second one. And of course, that's only the beginning of the story. Each of these articles, though not terribly long all by itself, has pages and pages and pages of citations, right? So, something like 60 studies are cited for each of these one studies, right? So again, people collaborate. Science is highly collaborative, and scientists all rely on the work of many other scientists. So that's one area in which we get the impression, a false impression from fiction. If we go back to fiction here, we get this notion that science is actually pretty fast, right? You can get a breakthrough every 44 minutes, right? It's like, wait a second, aren't most TV programs an hour? Yeah, but you have to subtract that commercial time, right? Apparently, even now, when there's a lot of TV that's getting made without commercials, they still seem like if 44 minutes is about right, or something like that. But in any case, that's one idea we get. But of course, science is actually quite slow, and if it's not really slow, then generally it's not very good. So yeah, let's put that there. So take a look at this excerpt here. This is from, again, one of these PLOS studies, and it talks about in its methods the data set that it's talking about. And this data set was collected between July 6th of 1989 and January 1st of 2012. Now, look, this was published in 2019. In fact, in February 2019. It's very, very recent. And so if you look at that, that's 7 years to process all that data, okay? Because, and in fact, they put it later in the thing, that's 75,354 person years of data, right? And that's about right, okay, for a decently comprehensive study. And even that's not gonna sort of prove anything, but it's going to add some information. And so again, science generally is very, very slow. It involves lots and lots of data collection, very careful parsing of that data. If you do it really fast, you're not going to do anything very well. So one of the top places we get most of our ideas about what science is or what it's like, actually, again, contrary from coming from science, comes from advertising, right? Uh, there was a really good article in Popular Science magazine. It's more than 10 years ago now. But the article featured one of their authors deciding to sort of write down in an average day every scientific sounding claim that they came across, and then at the end of the day spend some time researching each of those claims to see how much how scientific those claims really were, or how much they really came from science or scientists. And they cataloged a little over 100 claims in an average day, out of which one or two of them had some modicum of scientific legitimacy, right? The rest of them were just, pure marketing, right? It's nothing else. So, in general, the stuff that the messages that we get that about science being this source of like absolute certainty and confidence, most of the time these are people who are trying to sell you something and trying to transfer or build your confidence in some sort of sciencey sounding thing into confidence in their product. So again, pure marketing, not really science. So here are some examples of that. This is fairly old. You'll see, it looks old. But here we have a doctor advertising for cigarettes, right? Because doctors, we trust them, and doctors are never wrong about anything, are they? Of course, also you see these used to use babies to advertise for cigarettes too. That's no longer done. That's sort of largely frowned upon these days. But unless you think this is just a mere thing of the past, here's a much more recent advertisement. Yeah, there you go. It looks like, guy looks like a doctor to me. Of course, it doesn't say he's a doctor in the ad. He's just wearing a white coat, right? Maybe it's just a light colored trench coat. Don't jump to conclusions. That's right, he does. And so here we have a couple of food advertisements. Food advertisements are the worst for making, every food seems like if it has packaging, it makes some kind of a scientific claim about, clinically proven results, or it, has some technical jargon about its ingredients. So you have a little bottle of yogurt here. It says, hey, a little bottle of science, right? It's like, no, it's not science. It's just yogurt. It's around for quite a long time, 1,000 years at least. Then, of course, on the right, some of you may not quite be young enough or old enough to remember this one. This is a Snackwells, right? It was a brand of snack food that was made mostly in the 90s. And of course, their advertisements always featured the guy in the lab coat that sort of makes all the food. Well, why do you want to eat something made by a guy in a lab coat? If you want to eat food, you can eat, like, especially snacks and sweets, you can eat sweets made by grandma. Right? But no. People trust a guy in a lab coat, but that's who's making our snack. It was very bizarre when you really think about it. But, again, it's using the trappings of science, or the appearance of science, or what people think is the language of science, in order to build confidence in a product. So it's again complete advertising. It doesn't really bear any resemblance to the actual. And of course, every supplement in the world, this one I just picked off of, it was literally the first supplement that I saw on GNC's webpage. I don't know anything about it. But they all say things like this. So if you look over here, you can see this clinically shown to support heart health and all that stuff. Clinically shown, clinically proven, clinically whatever. But of course, the people making these things aren't actually doing any studies. And in fact, no studies actually have to even be done to say clinically proven, really. In some countries, there are laws about scientific claims specifically, and about factual claims in advertising. The United States is not really one of those places. Of course, if you tell a lie about a product and it causes harm, you can be sued for that harm. But in general, there's not anybody really policing advertising claims. Sometimes people will police themselves for fear of consumer backlash if they say something too outlandishly false. But generally, that's not that big of a deal in terms of legal penalties. People assume that everyone, like, there has to be this really great effort to speak the truth in advertising, and that's very much not the case. In any case, there's a little asterisk here on, as with all supplements of various kinds here, and there's the asterisk says, always, these statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. But they say that, and so what it means is there's been no medical research. So what is this clinical showing stuff, right? So that's, again, very common. Look at every bottle of supplements can be the same way. And again, we're trying to, you see this theme of trying to say this, build people's confidence in a product through their confidence in the certainty that scientists supposedly reach. So I mentioned before that some places have laws against making bogus scientific claims. The UK is one of those places, and in fact, they sort of shut down UK's eHarmony because of all of their scientifically proven dating methods, matching systems stuff, right? Of course, because there isn't any scientific evidence, right? There's no, you can't scientifically prove that people are well matched, right? I mean, what are you going to do? Just like see how long they stick together? I'll tell you, my parents were together for 24 years. They were a terrible match. So there you go. Also, you see this other ad for a germ-killing vacuum that has UV light in it, right? And so, like, I mean, okay, yes, it's true that UV radiation does kill bacteria, but putting lights on a vacuum is not going to do anything. And in fact, Oric, the company that makes this vacuum, eventually had to pay out some settlements overseas for some of these bogus sciencey sounding claims. If you look over here, this one here, this is sort of depressingly common. Basically, people are using people's desire to have their children's lives go well for them, just to manipulate them to sell products. I mean, to make people's insecurities about their children into a big sort of selling thing. And that's, again, depressingly common. But again, here you see a very, very old advertisement and a very, very new advertisement, but you see that they're sort of up to the same thing. So on the left there, I guess, yeah, you see there's this, how soon is too soon to start giving your child cola? And of course, I don't know if you can quite read that, but I'll read it to you. It says, not soon enough. Laboratory tests over the last few years have proven that babies who start drinking soda during that early formative period have a much higher chance of gaining acceptance and fitting in during those awkward preteen and teen years. Do yourself a favor. Do your child a favor. Start them on a strict regimen of sodas and other sugary carbonated beverages right now for a lifetime of guaranteed happiness. Okay, so now, number one, they can't guarantee happiness. I'm trying to break that too. Number two, what laboratory tests? Do you think they actually did any laboratory tests? Right? I don't either. And so here's the other thing is they obviously couldn't have, right? Certainly not with that conclusion, because they said just over the last few years. Okay. Well, how long does it take to give a baby soda and then to follow them into their teen years to see how things go for them? Right? That takes more than a few years all by itself. So it's very suspicious. Okay. But again, it's simply preying on people's insecurities and in a very naked way. But out on the right's no better. Okay, it says, yeah, you can potentially increase your child's IQ by 30 points in the first 5 years of life. No, you can't, right? Or at least, I mean, if there's any fact to this, it's that, like, when a child is born, their IQ is pretty low. They'd score pretty low on an IQ test because they can't do anything. Okay, and then by the time they're 5, they can sure score a heck of a lot better. So in that sense, I think it should be even more than 30 points. But generally, like, in order to actually increase somebody's IQ potential, like 30 points is huge. Okay, that's the difference between sort of normal being 170 is extremely deficient. An extremely deficient IQ. Meanwhile, 130 is inching toward genius level IQ. So 30 points is a huge difference in an IQ. And now you can, right? It is medically possible to change somebody's IQ by 30 points. You could do it with an axe handle, but I'll tell you, it's not going up. Okay, this notion you could sort of make your, and of course, if you see the other part of the advertisement, again, it's using this sort of science-y language in it, right? It says, oh, this formula contains activators and accelerators and advancers. Well, what is that? Okay, it's pure marketing BS. Okay, and so it's meant to sound science-y, and that's largely what people's idea of what actually science is and what science sounds like, what it looks like, and most of that is all coming from marketers. It's not coming from the real thing. And of course, everybody wants their children to be sort of, smart and geniuses and whatever. So we've got all these like sciencey toys. So like your periodic table of the elements blocks, which frankly, if you're playing with blocks, you're probably not learning anything about the actual periodic table of the elements. And if you're actually learning about the periodic table of the elements, you're probably told to be playing with blocks. But this is cute is all it is. You get, like then of course these science labs, the sour candy factory. Look, making candy, that's cooking. Okay, yeah, there's some science behind cooking, but I don't know, just because you make candy doesn't necessarily mean you're actually doing any real science. And so again, we get this sort of with the veneer of science draped over marketing for the purposes of making people feel like there's credibility or worth there when there isn't. Okay. All right, so one of the other places that we sometimes get an idea of what science is or science looks like, it's better than advertising, but it's still not great. And that's from what's called science journalism, which are most of the science stories that you see in the news or you read about on the internet or things like that. So here's just a clip from a news site from yesterday. And so what I want you to do is I want you to look at the thumbnails, right? They're very sort of visual thumbnails, right? They're pictures of things, right? That seem to have some sort of human interest, right? Pictures of animals, pictures of geographic features, pictures of spaceships, things like that. And the titles of all of these pieces are very matter of fact and very simple, right? So, for example, there's water ice found at the moon's poles, study says, okay? Or bones reveal Neanderthal child was eaten by giant bird, right? Okay, great. And so the idea is that it grants the assumption that there's a thing that a science did, and that's done, right? It's written now, and it was very simple. And I'm not going to knock science journalism entirely, because these people have a job to do, and their job is to write stuff about stuff that's very complicated and very nuanced, but they're under constraints of having to write about it very simply. And so, in general, I think the onus should be on the consumers of this media to understand that this is not only simplified, but is simplified probably to the point of, in some cases, being almost wrong. And just to realize that, yes, for casual interest purposes, science journalism is okay. It can feed that, but don't think you're learning all that much about the actual process of science or what it's like from science journalism. And I think that seems fair to me. And so again, here's some of the reality here. So remember what that science journalism looked like. Again, take a look at it again. And this is the front page of Nature again yesterday. I'm not really picking and choosing here. I'm not trying to cherry pick anything. Just clip paste, right? So in fact, read some of the headlines here. Okay, so for example, like electrical resistivity across a nematic quantum critical point, or high frequency of shared clonotypes in human B cell receptor repertoires, or singlet molecular oxygen regulates vascular tone and blood pressure and inflammation, etc. I mean, this is actual science, right? I mean, and these are short little letters in Nature. These aren't like the big old long Hongan studies either. This is the sort of boiled down version. So that's different. Okay, that's number. And of course, if you look at all the figures, they're like really complicated charts and graphs, right? The sorts of things that they put on the ACT science section, although probably honestly a little more complicated than a lot of the stuff you find there. This is in fact what actual science looks like. Okay, it's very unlike something like science journalism, and of course it's extremely unlike advertising, right? Sort of scientific advertising. Even stuff that we do see a lot of crossover in terms of big topics of our day. It's not that all scientific topics are sort of esoteric or sort of narrowly focused or something like that. It's just complicated, right? And so even when they're talking about simple things like fires, right? Say the title, you get titles like "Incorporating Anthropogenic Influences into Fire Probability Models: Effects of Human Activity and Climate Change on Fire Activity." Right, and there you go. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 authors. Okay, and that's just part of it. Again, this is part of it. Just a PLOS collection I randomly copied pasted. And so then here, of course, we have a really insidious place where sometimes people get certain ideas about how confident they can be about the results of scientific activity. And that's from basically advertising again, but advertising disguised as science journalism, which I think is really insidious, nefarious, and all sorts of other bad sounding words. So here again is just a clip from a news page from yesterday. And so you'll see up here kind of at the top, you've got the bottom of some of your real actual headlines, right, that are probably written by journalists and things like that concern current events of the day. And of course, then you've got a lot of these sort of human interest stories. There's something about like J-Lo and Meghan Markle and Steve Harvey and whatever, right? So I suspect this is what lots of people in fact actually read if they say that they're reading the news. But in any case, they are still, I guess, tangentially news stories. And then right below that, you've got content that looks pretty much the same as that, right? It sort of blends in nicely. But all of these things, look at this, they're all advertisements, right? And at least 3 of them. There's this one here about natural heartburn reduction. There's this one here, probably something about health. Here, there's a doctor recommending something, right? But again, this is advertising. This is not medical research. Okay, there's a big difference. And honestly, I'm bothered by this. If I ran a news site, I can guarantee you that I would go to great lengths to make sure that nobody was ever confused at what was my content, that is, what was news content and what was advertorial. right? I mean, you don't see, you don't see infomercials sort of woven into the TV news. And it's not like I have great respect for TV news or anything here, but at least they've avoided that, right? There's a very clear distinction between what's commercial advertisement and what is actual news. Even though, again, sometimes our definition of actual news gets stretched a bit. So again, if you were to click on one of those things, for example, I think this is what you get if you click on that one that says, "Hey, does your dog eat grass? You should, know this," or whatever. Because yeah, dogs eat grass. It's really no big deal. And so here again, this looks like a news story, right? It has all the appearance. It's got the text format that a news story has. It's got a photo of a guy. It says, the caption says, "Dr. Richter." Hey, that's a doctor. He's wearing a lab coat, has a stethoscope, right? He says, "A world famous expert in both Western and holistic pet care," right? It's like, he's world famous. Have I heard of him, right? So again, if somebody says somebody's world famous, you never heard of him. Well, maybe they're not world famous, right? Maybe they are, and you just haven't heard of them. Maybe they're not. Generally, if somebody has to tell you how famous they are, they're not that famous, right? So that's there's just that. But again, if you were to scroll up from here, you would see this, which again looks like it looks like research, right? You've got like a logo, and you've got a big headline. Again, it looks for all the world like real actual content, except for this little word up here, right? This advertising. That's easy to miss. And so again, you've got this stuff sort of masquerading as as real legitimate content. And again, I think people get the notion of what science is or what science does, or they get a level of certainty from it that science itself is not responsible for. It's advertising and journalism, which these days has a large content of advertising in it also. So what do things look like instead, right? What is actual science really getting us? Well, so again, I've taken this is like I took about 7 articles in a row where I sort of clicked and opened it up and just copied pasted and started highlighting stuff. So this represents about 13 minutes of work. This is I'd say more or less a random sample of scientific writing. So again, here's the title of the piece here, and we have in the methods and findings section stuff that I want to draw your attention to is in this highlighted stuff. So this one, right, talks about, this is actually the one with 75,000 person years of data, right, that we mentioned earlier. And it says in the methods and findings, it says right up front, it says, look, limitations of this study include potential residual confounding, unmeasured changes in risk factor profiles, potentially limited generalizability to different healthcare settings and populations not of European descent. Right? So right up front, they're saying there's a whole lot about this, even though it's a huge data set that we can't necessarily use it for everything. We can learn a little. There's big limitations. In fact, that's a very important part of scientific research, is to disclose what limitations you think the data has. And if you don't do it, somebody else is going to do it. They're going to write a reply. They're going to say, "Hey, great study, but we have to make sure we understand the limits of this study." And that's because that's science is very, very cautious. So again, another one of these. This is an article about the regenerative capacity in lamprey spinal cords. In case you really cared about that. Somebody does. I care lots. Some small community of people that care very much about this, and good for them, right? But notice what they're doing is they say right up front in the abstract of this article that the resilience of regeneration of vertebrates is not very well understood, right? Yet it would be really important to understand it. They said this is really challenging in tissues such as the nervous system, which possess a large number of terminally differentiated cells and often exhibit limited regeneration in the first place. Right? So they're like, look, we're studying something that just doesn't happen much anyway, and so we're studying like really small changes in infrequent, and it's really hard to come to any definite conclusion. Again, very typical of a scientific article. This one here is about the evolution of maize. We call it corn, right? Over a period of time. And the first thing I say, look, the evolution of maize is highly controversial, given the discrepancies related to the phenotypic and genetic changes suffered by the species. So, hey, lots happened with corn in a short period of time. Short period of time, sort of cosmically speaking, right? And they say, look, morphological and genetic traits of crops are difficult to evaluate in the absence of certain kinds of so again, a disclaimer right up front about the limitations of the data. But of course, they're going to do the study because they think they might be able to learn a little. Again, very cautious, very characteristic. This is continued. This is about the strongest claims you're going to get from a scientific publication. They say this result is suggestive of, right? And these results suggest, or these results provide new clues, right? That's it. That's about as strong a language as you're going to get in a scientific conclusion from an actual scientist in a scientific publication. Again, very cautious because they know how much they don't know. And so again, if you needed more, here's another one. This one is about mapping DNA sequences. It says it's proven difficult to determine the regulatory mechanisms of individual genes, let alone entire gene networks. It's particularly difficult to do this. And so what they do is they present a strategy for doing this. Right? They sort of explore a new method. Right? It's not like in TV, oh, here's the new method that solves all of our problems. That's not how it works in science, right? There's a new method, and they have to see what it does for a long time and compare it to other things, and be careful, right? Because it's a careful, cautious, slow business that involves a tremendous amount of detailed preparation and expense. Um, so again, here's a few more. All right. So that said, now let's get we can get to the reading for the day. It's from a fellow. You can probably tell from the way that it's written that it's a transcript of a speech, right? It's a public talk that he gave to some other philosophers and other members of the educated public during a seminar about his work. Popper himself, you'll see, a very happy guy here. So he's an Austrian by birth. He's one of the first people of the 20th century to be really interested in science and the scientific method. In fact, is one of the early people that we would say practice something called philosophy of science. Right? He's one of the very early contributors to that. And in fact, he develops this view of what the scientific method sort of is and ought to be, and sort of explains it in such a way that has had actually a very great impact on science itself. So a lot of scientists, if you sort of ask them what's special about science, what they think that they do, or what's special about what they do, or they will probably give you some sort of a story very similar to this one by Popper, even if they don't know that that's where it comes from. It's been very highly influential in science among scientists themselves. This is what in fact a lot of them will say. So let's take a look. So right at the beginning, he tells us what he's up to. He says, I first began to grapple with the problem: when should a theory be ranked as scientific? Right? Or is there a criterion for the scientific character or status of a theory? The problem which troubled me at the time was neither when is a theory true nor when is a theory acceptable. My problem was different. I wished to distinguish between science and pseudoscience, knowing very well that science often errs and that pseudoscience may happen to stumble on the truth. So Popper, of course, notices something that everyone notices if they think about it long enough, that in general, we don't know when any of our theories are actually true or not, right? We have, again, better and worse reasons for believing some of them or are better or worse. But until we get the great book of all truth and we can just sort of check our everything against the answers in that book, we just don't know, right? We don't have sort of this ultimate sort of arbiter of all that sort of stuff. So again, in the meantime, we just have to do the best that we can with what we have. And that's why one of the reasons why science is so cautious is because they know that we don't know. And so again, this is what we call the problem of demarcation. This is telling the difference between things that are sciences and maybe things that only claim to be sciences, or things that only kind of look like sciences, right? And so in fact, that's the difference, as he puts it, between science and pseudoscience. The Greek pseudo is a Greek prefix meaning false. Now I want to say something about this categorization right up front. It's that this doesn't account for everything. Okay, there are sciences, right, that are things that are pretty uncontroversially science, and we'll talk about a few of those. There are some things that are fairly uncontroversially pseudoscience. We'll talk about some of those. But of course, there are also things that don't fit on the spectrum at all. They're simply not science. They don't make any claim to be science, like literature. Philosophy is not science, but it's not pseudoscience. Right? It makes no claim to be science. It's just different, right? But it's just not on here at all. And so again, this doesn't count for everything, but again, Popper wanted to tell the difference between these two things. So if you ask around and ask people to name something that is often called a pseudoscience, right? They word association. If you're playing the Family Feud and someone says, we asked 100 people to name a pseudoscience, number one answer, probably astrology. And that's probably the number one answer people will give. And Popper himself uses it as an example very early in the reading. Now, of course, astrology is using biographies and the relative positions of stars and planets to try and say something about what people's lives or days will be like. And that's astrology. That's not, of course, the thing that it often gets confused with is astronomy, which is a branch of physics, right? And we're going to put that on the science side over here. Now, if you ever really want to irritate an astronomer, get whatever they do confused with astrology, or get those two words mixed up, right? They'll be real happy with you. Let me tell you. And so again, that's the astronomy and physics. It's the study of stars and planets and celestial bodies and the processes by which they work and all that. That's astronomy. Again, a branch of physics. Another sort of pseudoscience that is fairly common that people have some awareness of is parapsychology, because it's about like psychics and ghosts and stuff like that. And of course, on the other side, we're going to put something like its counterpart. Actually, I'm going to continue with pseudosciences for a bit. Cryptozoology be another one. This is the study of cryptids. Cryptids are creatures that are sort of rumored not to exist. And the reason they're rumored not to exist is because, in fact, they don't. Like the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and everything like that. So, I mean, I guess if Bigfoot does exist, I think maybe we have to come to grips with the fact that he's just blurry. Right? That's the way he is. Right? Homeopathy, a common pseudoscience. Right? This is devoted to the notion that the most potent form of a medicine is the most dilute form of the medicine, which is a very interesting and odd claim. And of course, on the other side of things, you can put the correspondences of these things. So, like psychology, right, is a science. Certainly, in the modern way, it's practiced, experimental, it's clinical. It uses, the trappings of the scientific method, etc. So that's going to count for us as more or less uncontroversially a science. Things like biology and chemistry, to get some of the other big ones in there, as correspondence to cryptozoology or homeopathy. Those are sciences, right? And I don't want to restrict ourselves just to the physical sciences here. Of course, psychology, not necessarily a physical science, but things like economics and anthropology, although many aspects of anthropology are physical sciences, it's an interdisciplinary science. It doesn't, again, not only physical sciences are sciences, but we'll count this as a list. This is not, of course, all the sciences in the world, but it's a representative list. And so I want to fill out this pseudoscience column with a few things that Popper himself mentions that I don't think are very well known these days. And so I want to spend a little bit of time giving you some context for that, understanding where they come from. And those are Freudian psychoanalysis, which is somewhat familiar to people these days, Adlerian psychology, which I think generally isn't, and the Marxist theory of history, which is it's unknown certainly to most Americans. I don't think Americans learn much about Marx for various social and political reasons. All right, so let's start with Freud here. This is a photograph, of course, of Freud with his, very famous cigar. He also was Austrian. So, we got the Austrians really coming up big in this lecture. Popper was Austrian, Freud's Austrian, Adler actually also Austrian. So there we go. So Freud, of course, is well known for this idea of the mind sort of existing in lots of different states, right? He says, look, we have the conscious mind, which is only as it were, as this illustration indicates, the tip of the iceberg, right? The rest of it is all sort of pre-conscious and unconscious. There's a lot more going on there than we realize, and that, in a sense, is true. Modern psychologists do acknowledge that there's a lot going on in our mental states that we're not consciously aware of. And that's what we're consciously aware of just isn't everything. But in any case, Freud has this very famous division between the ego, the superego, and the id, right? The id being a part of ourselves that is devoted to passions and desires and hungers, appetites, those sorts of things. The superego, which sort of understands rules and rationality, morality, those sorts of things. And the ego, which has to kind of mediate between the two, right? It has to take input from both sides and has to sort of synthesize things somehow. Now, Freud's writing actually had a really huge effect on screenwriting of all things, because lots of times for a long time, what screenwriters were trained to do was to take this sort of Freudian idea of these sort of parts of our personality and then externalize it using different characters in a script. So, for example, you might recognize this here as Dr. McCoy, the very fiery and passionate person who is always, has very emotional reactions to things, very visceral reactions to things, and the sort of coolly logical Mr. Spock here. And of course, they're very often filmed on one shoulder and on the other shoulder of Captain Kirk, who's supposed to be the ego, trying to mediate between the two influences. And so instead of having his own internal monologue about which courses of action to take, they externalize it in writing a very passionate, emotional character and a very emotionless, logical character to be essentially sort of, this was explicitly done, right, to try and mirror this idea of Freudian psychology. So very interesting historically there. But in any case, that's Freud. Adler's psychoanalysis, there's a picture of Adler. Adler was also Austrian. And you'll notice he has a very interesting style of mustache that was it sort of went out of popularity after another Austrian-born person, of course, Adolf Hitler, sort of ruined that mustache style for everybody. But there he is. This is before Hitler was a huge problem for everybody. So that was again very popular among Austrians. A very very thin little Hitler mustache is what we now call him. So anyway, that's Karl Popper. Not Karl Popper. That's Alfred Adler. Sorry. So Adler, if you again, not very familiar these days. It certainly hasn't had the influence that Freud had. But there are some vestiges of Adler's psychological theories in here. So he had a lot of theories about birth order that I think people still sometimes repeat, even if they don't realize that Freud Adler. If you ever hear somebody described as having an inferiority complex, that's really Adler. Some of that language comes from Adler. But the idea is he thinks that sometimes when people feel inadequate, sometimes they'll overcompensate, or they'll feel very insecure about it, or it'll start to really dominate the way that they behave. And so some of his theories involve trying to say that like really psychologically healthy people are these people without such complexes, or manage to deal with these feelings of inferiority and etc. So again, you see some of that. And of course, moving on to Marx here, Marx has perhaps the best hair of any a thinker of the 19th or 20th century, frankly. I mean, the 19th century was a century of great hair. I mean, if you look at a picture of, say, Ulysses Grant's cabinet, certainly I think it was declared in a scholarly book to be the hairiest cabinet in U.S. history. In general, the 19th century is really great, like Civil War photo albums, things like that. Look just Google for a while, and you can find. I mean, if you think hipsters do things with their facial hair and other parts of hair that are strange or unique, you've just not seen the 19th century yet. We're working our way back there, but we're nowhere close. But in any case, there's Karl Marx. Now, again, I think Americans don't learn a lot about Marx because, of course, he's associated with communism, and that's just un-American. So a lot of times he sort of gets ignored in a lot of American curriculum. And I think that does a bit of a disservice, because I think it's pretty hard to understand the global 20th century and certainly even the late 19th century without understanding something about Marx and Marx's ideas. Not all of which are completely stupid. It would be hard for something to be as popular as it was while being, completely stupid. And I think a lot of times, people are like, oh, so sort of just evil and obviously mistaken. Well, look, I think we can say Stalin was pretty evil, but Marx was not completely stupid. May have been wrong about many things, but was not completely stupid. So anyway, this is the Marxist theory of history is the thing that Popper wants to talk about here, which treats history in a very scientific kind of way, which might sound a little weird, but bear with me. When you put it this way, I think a lot of people have the temptation to treat history as a science, in a sense that if you think that things kind of had to happen the way they did, they were sort of caused to happen by these sort of like large-scale laws of history, right? That societies develop and change in ways that are regular and predictable. And pretty much anytime someone says that we have to learn our history so that we don't repeat it, is I think kind of echoing this kind of an idea that you can use all this historical data to figure out why things had to be the way they were, and then so you can use this then to predict the way things are going to be inevitably, right? And so a lot of people have done this. Now, for the most part, among professional historians, they don't do things this way. They sort of are trained specifically to avoid this kind of thinking anymore. But again, it's very common and very tempting to treat history this way. And so again, the nutshell version of Marx's ideas say something like this. He says, look, you look large scale, these big patterns of history. And if you look way back in ancient times, you had, sort of masters and slaves, right? And so these masters, they owned the people. And of course, the slaves are the people that did all the work in ancient cultures. And it's the people who owned the slaves who, they had all the fun, right? They got all the benefit. So, of course, if you're doing all the work, if you're one of the slaves, well, that really sucks, right? And so there's all this conflict, right? And that's what sort of typifies that, this conflict between the people doing the work and the people getting all the benefit from doing the work. And so all that conflict eventually sort of changes the system in such a way, Marx and other Marxist historians point out, in such a way that it transitions into this sort of feudalism, right? If you remember much about feudalism, the lords, they didn't own people, right? They didn't own slaves directly. They owned the land, right? But then, of course, the serfs, the peons, right? They were tied to the land, and of course, they did all the work, and the lords had all the fun. And now, of course, if you're one of the serfs, that sucks. And so there's all this conflict, and all this conflict eventually will sort of, cause things to change, and it will sort of reform the system. And then you get to Marx's own day, in his view, where you had this sort of early industrial capitalist system, right? Where instead of owning land or owning people, the ownership class, they owned businesses, right? Factories, those sorts of things. And of course, the wage earners and the workers are sort of beholden to these businesses for their livelihood. But of course, they're the ones doing all the work, and it's all the owners having all the fun. So, and if you're one of these wage slaves, as he called them, that sucks, right? And so there's all this conflict, and he thought eventually there would be this long and bloody revolution, because like there has to be. It always ends up that way. There's always class conflict between the owners of the means of production and the people who are actually doing all the work, the laborers. And eventually what will happen is you'll get to a point where the laborers will be themselves the owners of the means of production. We call that something like a socialist or a communist system, right? Now, again, that's the nutshell version. It's a lot more nuanced. There's a lot more technicality in there. Again, that's the nutshell version. If the nutshell version doesn't sound too terribly bad, again, always be suspicious of anything that can be described in about 3.5 minutes. But there it is. That's the idea. And again, the idea is to use history here as a kind of scientific evidence, right, for a scientific theory to predict, the future in some really reliable way, like a science might, right? So that's Marx. All right, so now again, let's return to our question, this problem of demarcation. What's the difference between what we have over here in the sciences and what we have listed in these pseudosciences? Okay? And that's where Popper's really going to make some progress, where he's going to really describe some of his thinking here. Now, one suggestion might be, well, it's the methods, right? It's some of the stuff they use. I mean, like, look, all of these sciences, they use like numbers and charts and math and stuff, right? Well, look, I mean, if you look, for example, at astrology, that looks pretty mathy. This is just a sample chart. I literally got it from a website that offered charts. It says sample chart. I'm like, oh, great. I was looking for a chart. Perfect. And so, no, I mean, that looks pretty mathy to me. And of course, it involves quantitative data. It involves observation. It involves cataloging of things, right? These are all things that sciences do. Again, if there's a difference between science and pseudoscience, there's going to have to be something that all the sciences have that all the pseudosciences lack, or something that all the pseudosciences have that all the sciences lack. And it doesn't seem like this one, at least, is going to do it. So, yeah, it's not how mathy it is. Of course, math itself isn't science. Math is something that many sciences use, not all of them. And so this is how Popper put it. He says, what worried me was neither the problem of truth, at least that stage at least, nor the problem of exactness or measurability. It was rather that I felt that these other three theories, though posing as science, had in fact more in common with primitive myths than with science, that they resembled astrology rather than astronomy. Okay, so there's something else going on. Now, is it the use of technology? Okay, this is actually one of those things people very much confuse science and technology. That's an easy thing to do. Because to some extent, our technology feeds our science, because new technologies mean new ways of exploring things. And to some extent, our sciences feed our technology, right? If you understand more about this, that, or the other thing, it seems like you might be able to do more technologically. But of course, the two aren't one and the same. We've had technology an awful lot longer than we've had science. I think the control of fire is probably our earliest recognizable, technology, or, hand tools and various things like that's technology. But of course, we only have had science for a couple hundred years in anything like its modern form. And just think of it this way. Do you have to understand the fundamental nature of the universe in order to make a washing machine that works? Right? I really don't think you do. So again, we shouldn't necessarily infer very much from the success of technology to the success of science. The two do stand or fall more or less independently. But in any case, is it the case that all these pseudosciences don't use any technology, but the sciences do? And I think, of course, that's clearly false. We have some parapsychologists here with some very, very, very fancy technology. So, here's the thing that Popper is really going to focus on, this idea of confirmation. Okay, because that's one of the other things that people will say if you, again, sort of play Family Feud and say, hey, we asked 100 people to say what the difference between science and pseudoscience. Like, people say, well, like, science has all this evidence in favor of it, right? And pseudoscience has no evidence in favor of that. Again, look a little closer, right? Popper's going to point out some things that are pretty interesting about this. So again, contrast, okay, something like astrology, again, we're going to pick on astrology, versus meteorology, right? More or less unquestionably scientific. So here I have clipped today's horoscope, literally today's horoscope for me, and it says, today, I'm a Gemini, right? There you go. So today your energy is so bright and engaging that it's downright obnoxious, right? They've clearly met me. So naturally, the world will be taking special notice of you. And look at this, I'm on YouTube today, right? Yeah, so obviously it was completely correct. Whereas the weather guy over here, like, I mean, look, I mean, we were so unconfident in what the weather was telling us, we decided we're going to go ahead and have class today. And we all got to campus and said, oh my God, let's not have class today. And so then we left. So so now I'm on YouTube. Okay, so again, what's right more often, your horoscope or your weather forecast? Right, it's probably your horoscope. But does that mean anything? Again, that's confirmation. It really is confirmation. Okay, and this is one of the things that Popper starts to point out that's really, really important. That confirmation, he begins to suspect, doesn't really mean anything. It's not actually very important. But of course, that's what all the cartoon scientists they say. They say, aha, my theory is correct, or aha, startling proof, right? You know, it's like eureka, all these eureka, they're all proof, right? It's all confirmation. When in reality, that's something that we can find in abundance anywhere. In fact, Popper puts it this way. He says, the most characteristic element in this situation seemed to me the incessant stream of confirmations. All these observations which verified the theories in question, and this point is constantly emphasized by their adherents. A Marxist could not open a newspaper without finding on every page confirming evidence for his interpretation of history. Not only in the news, but also in its presentation, which revealed the class bias of the paper, and especially, of course, what the paper did not say. The Freudian analysts emphasized that their theories were constantly verified by their quote-unquote clinical observations, right? So again, he says, you get all these theories, they all get, everything that happens confirms them, right? And so you start to suspect that that confirmation may not really be very valuable. In fact, let's talk as an example about Freud and one of his kind of ideas to illustrate this notion of confirmation of everything, right? And so Freud famously, or infamously, however you want to put it, had this thing called an Oedipus complex, right? He believed that males have had some sort of repressed urge, often to kill their fathers and marry their mothers, as the Greek sort of tragic character Oedipus in fact did. Now, of course, it's fair to point out Oedipus did not do this because he wanted. In fact, he did kill his father and marry his mother in the story, but not because he wanted to. Okay. Which I'm sure you know the story. If you don't know the story, hey, that's relevant here for briefly. Here's how it goes. Young little Oedipus, baby Oedipus, is born to a king of Thebes, right? King Laius and Jocasta, his mother, and they find out his fate from the oracle at Delphi, from the god Apollo, and it turns out he's fated, right, to kill his father and marry his mother. And they were like, whoa. Well, that sucks. And so his father sort of gave the kid over to one of his assistants and says, okay, go just leave it on the mountainside to die. Seriously. Right. And the guy's like, yes, sir. Right. And so he gets there, just like the baby, he's like, no, I'm going to pretend like I'm following these orders. This is the thing. You don't want your underlings to have any initiative. Right. And so, he sort of passes it along, and then this, passes, the baby eventually finds its way, to some other city that has another king and a queen, Polybos and Merope, who raise Oedipus as their own. Okay. In fact, at one point when Oedipus is little, he gets, somebody calls him a bastard, right? And he's like, what? So he talks to his parents. They're like, no, you're our kid, right? So they lie to him. And so he, grows up thinking that, they're his natural parents. And then he learns of his fate, okay? Forget how, it's all dramatic stuff. He says, oh, gee whiz, that's terrible. I'm fated to kill my father, marry my dad's so nice. I love my mom, but not that way, And so he runs away from home, and like he said, I'm going to avoid this. And like all these Greek plays always have people, sort of having their fate happen to them because they're trying to avoid it. It's just, the Greeks love that. So in any case, so he goes off out into the world on his own, to sort of, avoid this terrible fate. And in a case of sort of ancient road rage, he sort of meets this man and his party at this crossroads, and ends up like killing all of them, more or less in self-defense, right? And like, so here's again a scene from painted for there. He's sort of killing the whole party, and he doesn't know who it is, and they don't know who he is or whatever. But actually, it turns out that it's Laius, his father, the king of Thebes. So he kills them all, right? And so And Thebes is like, we don't have a king anymore. So eventually he makes his way to Thebes, and all that stuff. And Thebes is in trouble. They're having some trouble with a sphinx, and because by now, here's another painting. There's a young Oedipus solving the riddle of the Sphinx and sort of saving the city of Thebes from their Sphinx problem. And you'll notice from a lot of these paintings that they appear to have some problems with their clothing technology at the time. It's all sort of falling all over the place and coming off. And so, I mean, you have to understand that technology at the time, they didn't have any zippers. Of course, Velcro didn't happen until after the Roswell aliens landed, sort of buttons, snaps, those were there. They had invented the belt, but not the belt buckle. So belt usually worthless. And so this is what they got. They got a piece of cloth they got to drape over. That's it. Okay. But in any case, this is, it's a very naked time to live. But in any case, here's Oedipus, solving the riddle. See, he saves Thebes. And so Thebes is like, you should be our king. Hey, the queen's widowed anyway. Let's marry you off to this political marriage thing, and there you go. Right? And so, he marries the queen, Jocasta, who was in fact his mom. Gross, right? And so then, they have a fairly long and happy life for a while until things start to get, one clue drops at a time here until it all falls, sort of into place. And he's got, kids by this time. It's really gross. One of his kids, they all wrote other plays about everything, right? So Oedipus and his mom, right? They get married and all that sort of stuff. And then finally, one clue at a time, as I said, drops and it becomes clear what's really happened, that he in fact did kill his father and did marry his mother. And he's like, and then he gouges his own eyes out, right? And that's there you go. So that's the story. So he did those things not because he wanted. Anyway, Freud says that people like males have this desire, right? Whatever, and forget why. Imagine this now, because the whole point of this is really about confirmation, right? And about how everything seems to confirm Freud's theories. So imagine I say to Freud, I say, hey, look, Siggy, right? I kind of think I've no desire at all to kill my father and no desire to marry my mother. I mean, ew, right? And he says, aha, this proves my theory, right? Because he's like, you've just repressed it. This proves how much you've repressed it. You don't even acknowledge it. You've repressed it so much. Because of course his idea is that so much is going on unconsciously. So if I say no, if I repeat it, like, no, dude, you don't get it. Really gross. And he's like, yeah, that's what I mean. You've proven me right, everything you say. Okay, that's pretty frustrating. Okay, that seems pretty unscientific when you put it that way. So again, confirmation may not actually be worth much. But now imagine I say the opposite thing. I say, Sigmund, I have to tell you, wanted to kill my dad for a long time, and would love to marry my mother. It'd be great, right? And he says, yeah, see, told you, right? It confirms my theory. Eureka. Well, that's a Greek phrase, right? I don't know, whatever German for that is. All right, so Popper chimes in. He says, look, what I had in mind was that his previous observations may not have been much sounder than this new one, right? That each one in its turn had been interpreted in light of previous experience, and at the same time counted as additional confirmation. What, I asked myself, did it confirm? Well, no more than that a case could be interpreted in the light of a theory. But this meant very little, I reflected, since every conceivable case could be interpreted in the light of Adler's theory or equally of Freud's. And of course, there's that paragraph in there where he says, you imagine somebody like saving a child from drowning, and Adler can explain it by saying, oh yeah, he had a feeling of inferiority, and he needed to prove himself that he could dare to save the child, do something heroic, and then you have, somebody pushing a kid into the water to drown them, right? And he says, yeah, because he wanted to prove to himself that he dared commit some crime. I mean, like you could, again, everything confirms the theory, and that, again, is not very good. That means sort of a bad theory. But of course, he wants to contrast this sort of incessant confirmation with something else. And so he talked about this. He says, with Einstein's theory, the situation was strikingly different. Take one typical instance. Einstein's prediction just then confirmed by the findings of Eddington's expedition. This confirmation was very, very different. So here's a photograph of Arthur Eddington, who's an astronomer. We'll talk to you about his observations here. So here's the deal. Here's what sets up. Here's the context behind what Popper was saying. Popper was relying on his audience to be pretty familiar with this, but again, you might not be. So I'll tell you. Newton thought that light travels in straight lines. Period. Okay. And so when it reflects off of mirrors, you just take a straight angle of reflection, all that sort of stuff. I mean, light travels in straight lines all the time. Period. That's the way Newton handled light. one consequence of some of Einstein's theories is that light actually ought to be influenced by gravity, and that means that if the light from something passes by a very gravitationally heavy object, right, or that it should be noticeably affected. And so the sun, being the biggest thing anywhere close to us, should then affect the path of starlight. And so as starlight is passing sort of really close to the sun on its way to us, its apparent position should look different than its actual position, right? And so the problem with trying to make this observation, of course, there's this prediction here, but the problem with making the observation is you can't see the stars when the sun's out, right? They're there, right? You just can't see them. The sun's too bright, except during an eclipse. Then you can see the stars that are right around where the sun would be. And so you can see the stars whose light is coming right by the sun. So what you do, the theory is then, you can take a photo, right, of all the stars during the eclipse and pay closest attention to the ones that are very, pretty close to that sun's area there. And then you take another picture when you're off on the other side of the sun, when the nighttime side of the Earth is facing that way, and you take a picture of the same star field, and then see if the stars are in a different position or at the same position. And if they're in a different position, well, then Einstein was right. And if they're in the same position, well, Newton was right? That their position didn't change coming by the sun or not coming by the sun. And so the trick is then to get a picture during an eclipse. Now, eclipses aren't phenomenally rare, but they're often, you often have to travel to see them, and the places where they occur aren't always convenient. And so Eddington actually had quite a hard time. So, one time he, went out on an expedition, and it was just in like terrible conditions, like in a jungle or something like that, and all the equipment was just like the photographic equipment was just ruined by the time he got there and back. And so no dice there. There was another time where he had, had everything set up and it was great, and it was just cloudy, right? And so no dice there. And it took him several tries, several years, but he finally was able to get this really good picture of the stars during an eclipse. And so you compare the stars, without, that aren't going by the sun, to the same star field that is going by the sun at different times, right? And then you can see whether it's sort of the same or different. Turns out it was different. And so Popper says this, okay? He says that it turns out the impressive thing about this case is that the risk involved in a prediction of this kind, if observation shows that the predicted effect is definitely absent, then the theory is simply refuted. The theory is incompatible with certain possible results of observation. In fact, with results which everybody before Einstein would have expected. Okay. So this is what he means by risky predictions. Those are a big deal for Popper. And he gives us this whole big list then, right, of these criteria, right? And in short, you could sort of boil it down just to say this, right, that the criterion of the scientific status of a theory is its falsifiability, refutability, or testability. Okay? And so, again, you can read this on your own, but I wanted to sort of point out a couple of things about, like, say, 1, 4, and then 6, right? So the first one says, look, it's easy to obtain confirmations for nearly every theory if we look for confirmation. This is very much what Goodman was saying about induction generally. All of our experience could have all kinds of different things that it equally well confirms, right? And this is, again, one of the reasons why induction doesn't get us much, right? These confirmations are too cheap. They're too easy to be worth anything. And so we shouldn't bother looking for confirmation. It doesn't get us anywhere. And so he then says that a theory that is not refutable by any conceivable event, this is in Rule 4 here, is non-scientific. And again, this is different than the cartoon scientists. The cartoon scientists always have these irrefutable theories, and of course they're unquestionably correct, right? Well, that's not science, right? Nothing's unquestionable. Nothing's irrefutable. If it is, it's not science, okay? And so irrefutability, as Popper puts it, is not a virtue of a theory, as a lot of people think. It's a vice, okay? That means it's a bad theory. And so if he looks at number 6, it says confirming evidence should not count except when it is the result of a genuine test of a theory. And this means that it can be presented as a serious but unsuccessful attempt to falsify the theory. And so now you have this picture of the daily activity of a scientist. And again, this is the kind of story that most scientists themselves will tell about what they do and why they do it, and what's important about why they do what they do. In general, what scientists are doing is they're looking to disconfirm various kinds of ideas. They're looking to test various kinds of ideas. They come up with an idea, and they come up with some procedure to see whether that idea is wrong or not. And so really there are only two kinds of scientific conjectures or scientific theories on this view. There are the ones that have been refuted, okay, and that they're just false, right? They're discarded. And then there's the theories that haven't been refuted yet. And that's about the strongest thing that any scientist, when they're being careful, will ever say about a theory, is that it hasn't been refuted yet, right? If it's a good one. And that's very different than, again, what most people think, or the impression of science or scientific activity that most people have. But that's the more correct version. And so, again, we started this particular lecture with the idea that skepticism that we have seen, this philosophical skepticism, was in some ways at odds with science, right? It was something that science sort of casts a lot of doubt on. It's like, well, gosh, we can't know that little if we have, all this science and technology and stuff like that. But honestly, if you look at what the scientific method really is, it's this method of trying to disprove things. It's this method of trying to test things. And so if you think of the definition of skepticism as this systematic questioning of our beliefs and examination to look for sources of error or possible error, if you put it that way, well, then science is skepticism. And that's actually what's good about it, right? That's what's important about it. So far from skepticism undermining science, it's not really true at all. Science embodies skepticism. Science is skeptical, and that's actually what makes it good. And so again, certainty, confidence, all these things are not necessarily what we want. We don't want confirmation. What we want a much more careful approach. We want an approach where we're trying to find the mistakes that we are making. Otherwise, we can't ever grow or learn. And even if we never do know something, we can at least throw away the stuff that we think is at least wrong or wrong-headed or false or refuted. Right. All right. So with that, we'll conclude this look at Karl Popper and his view that science, right, is exemplified by falsifiability or testability.